Mr. Nigel Farage.
Thank you, Donald, and good evening, everybody. Well, some more drama in the White House today. You could, of course, say, when isn't there drama? More of that later on. But the Labour Party, tomorrow will be their debate on whether they should push as a party for a second referendum. Hey, it's a slam dunk. 86% of the members of the Labour Party who were polled want a second referendum. The issue now is, what should the question be, and should it include the option to remain? Now, John McDonnell, Shadow Chancellor, and remember, long-time Eurosceptic, was talking to Nick Ferrari earlier on today.
We respect the referendum, but the government deal that they'll bring back, we need to have a view on that, and the best way to have a view on that is to have a general election. We've said if we can't get a general election, we keep on the table the option of a people's vote, so that a public vote can take place on the deal.
Well, so he's talking about a referendum on the deal. He knows, and Corbyn knows, that the Eurosceptic position within the Labour Party is being lost. The party itself is now overwhelmingly for a second referendum, overwhelmingly for remaining inside the European Union. And at today's Labour conference in Liverpool, I mean, there were hundreds of European Union flags being flown outside the conference centre, but equally there were European Union flags being flown inside the hall, and a T-shirt that's catching on at the Labour Party conference: love Corbyn, hate Brexit. So that's where the Labour membership very, very firmly are. And coming into this battle, adding his muscle, power and reputation, is one former Labour Prime Minister, Tony Blair, who writes in tonight's Evening Standard, in his push for a second referendum, the case for a people's vote is now overwhelming. The real betrayal of the country would be in refusing it. And he goes on to say, this solution is the only route to salvation. Blair the preacher, back again. What do we expect? He says, as for Labour, its members are massively in favour of a people's vote. Well, Tony, that may be right with the members, but what about the 5 million? What about the 40% of Labour voters who supported Brexit? He goes on to say, the problem with Brexit is Brexit, because there is no resolution. So there you go, folks. You idiotic, stupid, moronic 17.4 million people who think we can be a free country. It can't be done, according to Tony. There is no resolution. And in fact, I heard much the same thing from Alistair Campbell this morning when I had the privilege of sharing the couch with him on Piers Morgan's show. So that is what Tony Blair is telling us. What an extraordinary use of the word betrayal. What an amazing twisting of the English language. Surely the real betrayal would be to ignore the wishes and the will of 17.4 million people in the greatest democratic exercise in the history of this country. But of course, Tony Blair is a proper, full-on Euro fanatic. He would sign us up to the whole thing, lock, stock and barrel. Well, I've given you my view. So you tell me, is Tony Blair right to demand an option to stay in the European Union? If you think, yep, absolutely, any chance we get to overturn Brexit and stay part of this European club is welcome, then call me on 0345 6060 973. Or maybe you think, hang on, we had a vote, it's done, please just get on with it, in which case tweet to 84850. Or maybe you think, former Prime Ministers actually just ought to butt out. They're not really being very helpful. That's how you feel. You can tweet using the hashtag Farage and LBC at LBC. And of course, you can watch us on Facebook Live. And as you do in huge numbers, comment there too. Let's go to Craig, who lives in Lincoln and is a new caller. Welcome, Craig.
Hi, Nigel. How are you doing? All right?
Yeah, well, I just get very upset when I hear Tony Blair saying it would be a betrayal not to give us a chance to stay in the European Union.
Well, at the end of the day, the vote was that we leave. So if there's a second referendum, in my opinion, the second referendum ought to be, do you want to take the deal that the European Union have offered us, or do you want to come out with no deal?
Well,
Simple as that.
Yeah, in a sense, Craig, that's what John McDonnell was saying. And of course, we continue to have this ambiguity in the Labour Party between a party itself that is becoming overwhelmingly Europhile and a leadership who are Eurosceptic. But the truth of it is, Craig, that the Labour Party are rapidly moving, are they not, towards being a party that wants to stay in.
They are, but what I really don't understand, Nigel, in all honesty, that people seem to overlook all the time, is we're always getting told how this generation of people is the first one ever that is set to do worse than its parents.
Mm-hmm.
Funny enough, this is the first generation ever that has lived its whole life inside the EU. That says something about it, really, doesn't it? But nobody seems to take that into consideration.
Well, I certainly think, Craig, that one of the things that we've seen with the European Union and with the free movement of people is the rich get richer and the wages of many ordinary folk being driven down. So, yeah, I do have some sympathy with you. Where do you, Craig? I mean, I clearly understand where you stand on this. If Labour, when they do tomorrow opt for a second referendum and ultimately back an option of Remain, do you think that'll help or damage their electoral prospects?
In the big cities, they will be wiped out, I believe. If there was a general election, they've already said that there is going to be a second referendum to whether we should stay in or not. In the big cities, they would just get wiped out.
I agree with you. I think they're making a huge mistake. Craig, I thank you very much indeed for your call. I go to Redditch in Worcestershire to speak to Peter. Good evening, Peter.
Hi, Nigel. How you doing?
I'm doing well. So is Blair right to say that we must have the option in a second referendum, which it's vital to hold that referendum, we must have the option to remain in the EU?
I think Labour should oppose. That's what they are. They're the opposition. So I think they should have an opposing view. So at the moment, what's coming from the Tories is very much, we're going to have this plan, this is what we want to do. So I think for Labour to have an opposing view, I think is valid. I think that's what they should be doing.
OK, so the Tories want to take us half out and keep us half in. At least that's how I read Chequers. So the job of the Labour Party is to oppose. But is the job of the Labour Party to oppose the other party or to oppose the greatest exercise in democracy in this country's history?
Well, this is it. And I think that we spoke back in January, Nigel, and actually it was the very first time we ever talked about a second referendum. And I suggested there could be two options to Brexit as opposed to staying in. We discussed that back in January. What I feel, I've done a lot of... You were actually very kind to me back then as a Remainer, and you listened to me.
Well, Peter, I believe in open democratic debate being conducted on a civil level, so that's the way this thing should be done.
And what I've actually found is, I think Brexiteers and Remainers, such as myself, we're really coming together. We are coming closer to the truth. Something's not right in Britain at the moment. Something's going badly wrong. And I think as a Remainer, I blame our government.
Well, I think, do you know what, Peter? As a Leaver, I think I blame our government as well, because they haven't handled this with any clarity at all.
I remember when I went to vote, I voted Remain because I thought, we're the fifth largest economy. We've got so many resources. We should be raking it in, but we're not. And I blame our government. I know a lot of people who went to the polls blamed Europe. I still blame our government. I think they have shown their true colours. The thing that's wrong in the country at the moment isn't Europe, good or bad. It's our government and our ability to govern ourselves that's letting us down.
Well, I would agree that our government is very, very poor, but I still think the point about Brexit is that when we get self-government back, maybe we get a bit of confidence back. I don't know. Peter, I thank you for your call. Neil in Swansea knows exactly how he feels about Tony Blair. He says Blair should go back to where he came from whilst counting all his millions. Someone should tell Blair that him and Major are responsible for Brexit by arrogantly refusing us referendums on the dodgy treaties they signed with the EU. Now we voted leave. It's a bit late for him to preach, says Graham. Well, Graham, I do rather agree with you. A lot of treaties went through without us ever being asked. Keith is calling from Newquay in Cornwall and is a new caller to the show. Good evening, Keith.
Good evening, Nigel.
So is Blair right?
No, of course he's not. I mean, I can't believe that Jeremy Corbyn, who is promoting anti-austerity, would go for a referendum which would keep us in the EU with a bunch of austerity freaks. I mean, the reason why would we want that? Why would because he's contradicted himself there, and I believe that it's all about austerity. It's nothing to do with immigration and the Irish question. You know, they are austerity freaks, and austerity is an insidious economic policy designed to create man-made division, which always leads to man-made racism.
Well, look at the Mediterranean,
austerity,
Keith. Look at the Mediterranean. I mean, it's sort of sadomonetarism almost, isn't it, what's been going on in Greece and Italy and countries like that?
Mediterranean. I know. You know, if we didn't have austerity in this country, we wouldn't care less how many immigrants came here. Because when people are content...
I don't agree with that, Keith, because I do actually think that a population exploding the way that it has had a genuine effect on our quality of life, even taking money out of it. But in general terms, you're right. When people are relatively well off, they're content, and they're happy just to get on with life. Keith, I thank you for your call. On Facebook, Mo says, if we vote to leave again, do you really think they'd accept that? They'd blame it on something else and fight for a third. They would, I agree. Simon says if there was a second referendum, they would lose it by an even bigger margin, and they still wouldn't accept it. Common theme emerging here. Gary says, so we have a second referendum, then do we have a third and a fourth? Anastasia says, yes, Tony Blair is absolutely right. Well done, Tony. So some support there for Tony. Let's go to Croydon and speak to Nick. Nick, is Tony Blair right?
No, he's not. No.
Tony Blair is absolute.
No, he's not. He's wrong, and should have shut up and go away. I'm tired of hearing about Tony Blair. I wouldn't trust the bloke to have told me the time. I really wouldn't. We were asked, Nigel, we've had this previously.
Yep.
We were told explicitly this was a once-in-a-generational vote.
Yep.
We were told explicitly the government would implement whatever we chose.
Yep.
Well, they asked us, we chose.
Yep.
Get on with it. The government spent, and the Parliament approved, 9 million quid of taxpayers' money.
Yep.
To send a leaflet round saying that.
No, absolutely, Nick, and it was very clear in there, we will abide by the result. On a scale of 0 to 10, Nick, how angry are you with Tony Blair?
Oh, minus 3,742. Well, he is the original busted flush. And actually, I feel quite sad in some ways, because for him in some ways, because he clearly doesn't recognise it himself. I mean, whatever he says, I think.
Well, yeah, but he is. But he is, Nick. He's a Euro fanatic. I know. I've crossed swords with him. He even shouted at me once. Nick, I thank you for your call. You're listening to the Nigel Farage Show here on LBC. It's now 16 and time for the news headlines with Lisa Aziz. Tony Blair wades into the Labour Party debate about the second referendum, telling us it'd be a betrayal of the country not to have a second referendum with an option to stay in the European Union. He says this solution is the only route to salvation. Ever the preacher man, Tony Blair. Meanwhile, the Conservative Party, well, now their cabinet have met this afternoon, and of course, they've been talking about the Chequers proposal. Now, a lot of speculation over the weekend. David Davis in particular, and I spent some time with him on Saturday. David pushing very hard, saying, look, let's go for a Canada Plus style trade deal. The EU could well be in a mood to accept it. And speculation that the Cabinet today might shift away from this Chequers position. Remember, that's the position that is rejected by many in the Conservative Party, rejected quite clearly by the country, with only 12% support, and has been rejected by the European Union. This was Brexit Secretary Dominic Raab speaking to the media after the Cabinet meeting.
We had a good, healthy discussion. The Prime Minister made clear we're going to keep our calm, hold our nerve, and press the EU on some of the criticisms that they've made, but also to be clear that there are no credible alternatives that the EU has come up with. So we're going to hold our nerve, but continue to negotiate in good faith.
If you want the European Union to come up with some credible alternatives, Mr. Raab, don't hold your breath. What about you coming up with some credible alternatives? Your Chequers plan doesn't work anywhere. Why is Mrs. May clinging on to this? Why does Mrs. May want to keep us so closely wrapped in to European law, rather than, as she promised all of us at the election and before, keeping the will of the people? And it's such a wasted political opportunity, particularly given with what Labour will do in Liverpool tomorrow. A Conservative Party that said, we're going to offer a free trade deal. We believe they'll take it. If they don't, we'll leave on WTO rules. Do you know what? In the opinion polls, they'd sweep the country and they damaged Labour. That's certainly my view. Back to Tony Blair. Is he right? Is Tony Blair right? Brian, a new caller from Edgware. Good evening.
Good evening, Nigel. Yes, I think for the first time in my life I agree that Tony Blair is right. We should have another referendum.
Yep.
It should be a binary question. It should happen after the 29th of March, and it should say, do you want to remain out or would you like to rejoin? And then no doubt all the rejoiners who criticise us for not setting out the terms on which we're leaving can specify the terms on which we'd be rejoining.
Well, of course, if we were a country that had exited the European Union to rejoin it, we would have to sign a new treaty that would commit us to joining the euro. So it'd be very unlikely, wouldn't it, once we'd left?
Well, that's up to the rejoiners to make their case. If they think we should rejoin, let them make the case, just as we made the case for leaving.
OK, so is it unreasonable, Brian, to have another referendum before we've actually left? That's your point, really, isn't it?
Well, that is my point.
Yeah,
yes, we've made the decision and we should honour it.
Yeah. Do you know what, Brian? It's the first time I've heard anyone put it quite like that. I mean, I've kind of thought maybe a referendum in 20 years' time or something like that. But to ask for another referendum before we've actually enacted the first one is clearly and completely wrong. Thank you, Brian. Interesting point of view. Chris is a new caller from Brittany in France. Good evening, Chris.
Good evening, Nigel. My argument isn't so much about Mr. Blair being wrong or right. It's more that I think that in the first place, yourself and your ex-party were wrong to push for Brexit. Also, I think it's a disgrace that it's still going on, and you are still flouting this Brexit, this I don't know, this circus, really. How do you sleep at night, Nigel? Having started all this rubbish off, this garbage.
Well, if I'd been involved, Chris, if I'd been involved, we'd be out by now.
Listen, Nigel. Listen. You honestly, in my opinion, I'm going to try and not be rude here, but you started off in politics as a joke, yeah. And I still laugh at you when I see you. And I think you're funny.
Well, I tell you what, Chris, and I said this to the European Parliament the day after Brexit. I said, when I first came here, you all laughed at me. Well, I said, you're not laughing now. And isn't it funny? And, of course, you're right, Chris. I have been the most mocked, derided, lampooned figure in modern British political history. But, Chris, like it or not, I think I did change the landscape a bit, didn't I?
Oh, hey, Nigel, there's no disputing you've changed it, but one question I'm asking you, mate, is seriously, do you really believe deep down in your heart of hearts that you've changed it for the better? Because I think you've made a big mistake, mate.
Well, Chris,
and a lot of people regret what you've done now, Nigel.
Chris, I believe the United Kingdom should be an independent, self-governing, democratic nation that enjoys with its European neighbours friendship and free trade. I have believed that and fought for that for 25 years, Chris, and I believe it now ever as strongly as I did.
Well, Nigel, I think the fact that you're in charge of UKIP, I think that exhibits the fact that you were a believer of that, leader of the UKIP party. Of course you're going to believe that, but I do believe that Brexit is a little bit unfair for the younger people. It's making the UK look at shambles. The current government's a laughingstock.
Now, Chris, on that point, you and I are seeing eye to eye. I don't think they're carrying it out properly. Your point about young people is interesting, because right across Europe, it's the young people who are rebelling against the European Union.
Yes, I understand that. Well, Nigel, listen, I'm really upset that we've agreed on the point. You've really spoiled me now.
Oh, good, I'm pleased. If I've spoiled your early evening drink, I'm pleased. Chris, we can agree to disagree and do so on civil terms, and thank you for calling the show. You see, democratic debate can be passionate, but it can be civil. He didn't even swear at me. I thought he was going to. I thought we were going to have to use the pause button at one point there. Let's go to Bo in the East End of London and speak to Mervyn. Mervyn, good evening.
Hello, Nigel. How are you?
I am well. I've just about had enough of Tony Blair, though.
Me too. You're one of the few men I'm pleased to speak to who actually answers the question they're asked, instead of most of the politicians. To say to Tony Blair, what great news it is that he's spoken out, Nigel, because he's political poison. People will now vote in our way, thank God.
Well, you may be right.
Let's face it, he's the man that virtually caused war in the Middle East, then he became the peace envoy. Is there a bigger joke than that?
You couldn't invent it. You couldn't make it up, Mervyn, could you? But Mervyn, whether you like Blair or not, he is clearly a very intelligent man and a man of great achievements. And he says the problem with Brexit is Brexit. He says there is no resolution.
Well, the man, I always thought he was a Cheshire cat. He was, that silly grin. He was a very entertaining man. He was a barrister, so he obviously learned how to talk people out of all sorts of trouble and talk us into all sorts of trouble. But the thing is, Nigel, what I've noticed lately is all these Remainers are doing the work of the EU. They're getting us into a position that the EU like to do to get people voting and voting again and so get it right.
Well,
they're being their pals. They're stupid.
Mervyn, be in no doubt, they are colluding with Monsieur Barnier and that department in Brussels. Of that, I have no doubt. Mervyn, I thank you. Tanis on Facebook says, so, our vote in the referendum doesn't count then. Oh, my God. Nikki says, the Messiah, Tony Blair. I only called him a preacher man. But no, Nikki says, the Messiah, Tony Blair, speaks and offers us salvation. Is that the same kind of salvation he offered us when he totally destabilised the Middle East? Come on, there must be some Blair supporters out there. Let me know. 0345 6060 973. Blair attempting to spread hysteria. It's the millennium bug all over again. All over again. We are all far better informed to the effects, potential impacts of Brexit. Why shouldn't we vote again? Because we voted to leave. Let's leave. And as Brian from Edgware said earlier, if you want another referendum, have it after we've left and you can assess how Brexit affects people's lives. Blair started this by signing ever closer ties with the EU without asking us. You reap what you sow. Not a great deal of sympathy, it has to be said so far, for former Prime Minister Tony Blair, preaching to us like the Messiah. Jamie is a new caller from Newcastle. Good evening, Jamie.
Hi, Nigel. Yeah, great to speak to you.
Well, welcome. Pleasure to have you on the show. What do you make of Blair's comments today?
Yeah, ridiculous, really. I would say it's political suicide if they really go down that route.
Yeah, I mean, you're talking from a part of the country with a shed load of Labour MPs and, of course, a really, in many parts of the North East, a big Brexit vote, wasn't there?
Yeah, definitely, yeah. It was, I think it was the first vote came in was Sunderland, and the vote that sealed it was the Hexham constituency numerically, but I think in the North East, I'll speak stereotypically. We're proud people, and if we'll give you the respect, with the trust up front. If you mess with us, it's a different story.
So how would proud people, Jamie, how would proud people feel if they were told you are very stupid, very silly, thick, ignorant, and you must vote again?
They would not go down that route. They will like the Labour vote in this area is essentially a protest vote, and it's been there for generations. And I see the same thing happening with the referendum. I was down in Bolton on Saturday at the rally. Okay. And as well as I want to thank you for the referendum and all the campaigning. But
that's kind of you.
But this is now moving on away from the EU referendum. That's been decided. This is now about democracy, and I'm sure I can remind you about at the end of that rally on Saturday when the subject of the second referendum was mentioned. The frustration in the audience was tangible.
Yeah, no, it was. It was.
Can I thank you, because I don't think people realise this. You're leading people. You're able to give them hope, because there's a lot of people who have very little in this country who feel extremely cheated at the minute. And you're able to give them hope and to say...
Well, Jamie, thank you. No, Jamie, you're very kind. For those that don't know what Jamie was talking about, there was a meeting on Saturday in Bolton with Kate Hoey from Labour, David Davis, Conservative, and me, basically saying, please can we have the Brexit that we voted for? Mr Blair, of course, takes a very, very different view. You're listening to The Nigel Farage Show, exclusively on LBC, and it's now 6:30 and time for the news with Lisa Aziz. We're discussing Tony Blair and whether he's right to say that it's absolutely vital to have a second referendum that includes the option of staying in the European Union, because this solution, according to Mr Blair, is our one and only route to salvation. More of that in a moment, but for now, more drama in Washington, in the White House. I know it happens every day, but this story actually could be perhaps quite a big one. It concerns US Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein, but I'm guessing if you've been hearing it on your news, you're probably very confused as to what's going on. Let's try and cut through this. I'm going to speak to Simon Marks, LBC's US correspondent in Washington, D.C. Simon, good evening.
Hello, Nigel. You can count me among the confused.
Good. That helps a little bit. So just explain to people what Rosenstein's job actually is or was. Has he been fired?
No, he still seems to be in his position. As listeners to LBC will know, it has been a dizzying, bewildering few hours here, fueled by reports from the political website Axios and CNN that Rod Rosenstein had offered his resignation to the White House Chief of Staff, John Kelly. Then there were reports that he hadn't resigned, but said that he was on his way to the White White House expecting to be fired. He's had his meeting at the White House, not with President Trump. The president's up in New York. The two men have apparently spoken on the telephone and now agreed to meet again on Thursday. So Rod Rosenstein's immediate future looks like it'll be decided later this week. He is the Deputy Attorney General of the United States. The reason why he matters in the story of the Trump presidency is because he is the man to whom Robert Mueller, the special prosecutor digging into ties that may have existed between Donald Trump's election campaign team and the Russians, digging into the possible obstruction of justice that some here argue was committed by President Trump when he fired the FBI director James Comey last year. Robert Mueller reports to Mr. Rosenstein, the Deputy Attorney General. Why? Because the Attorney General of the United States, Jeff Sessions, had to recuse himself from any involvement in the Russia probe because he was not entirely truthful in his testimony to Congress when he was confirmed as Attorney General of the United States about his own communications with the Russians during the election campaign. That decision, as you know, Nigel, by Jeff Sessions infuriated Donald Trump, who has been complaining volubly about it ever since.
And so is it true to say that Rosenstein, as somebody who works for the president, has said some pretty disloyal things about the president?
Well, what has sparked this immediate question over his future is a report that was published by the New York Times last Friday. Listeners to LBC will have heard breaking news coverage of that as well, in which the newspaper claimed that at one point the Deputy Attorney General had offered to wear a wire, a secret recording device, during his interactions with President Trump. He never made good on that offer. It never happened, but the offer was reportedly made. Some people here say it was made sarcastically. Others say it was not. It was also reported by the paper that Mr. Rosenstein said that he believed he was in a position to recruit at least two members of the cabinet to support moves to invoke the 25th Amendment to the American Constitution. That's the bit of the Constitution that you could, if you wanted to, use to oust President Trump from office in a constitutional fashion. And remember, a couple of weeks ago now, it seems like it was an epoch away, but it was only a few days ago, that anonymously written opinion piece by a senior Trump administration official published by the same New York Times claimed that members of the cabinet had discussed possibly using the 25th Amendment to get rid of Donald Trump. So on the face of that reporting, which Rod Rosenstein completely denies by the New York Times, but on the face of it, he was conniving and conspiring against the president that he serves. And this, of course, goes to the heart of the revelations that were contained in Bob Woodward's book, then fueled by that opinion piece in the New York Times, that, you know, within Donald Trump's inner circle, there is a resistance at work, constantly trying to undo the president, save himself from some of his worst excesses, and at times, according to all of this reporting, even thinking about trying to get rid of him.
I have to say, it all looks true to me, Simon, I must say. Listen, I mean, it's an ongoing, never-ending soap opera, isn't it?
It's no secret. You know people inside that administration. I know people inside that administration. I suspect we know different people, Nigel, but I know people in there that say, look, you know, you want me in a position of influence in this administration because if I wasn't here, you can't even imagine what would be going on. So this idea promulgated by Bob Woodward that there has been an administrative coup d'etat against President Trump, of which perhaps the Deputy Attorney General is a member. I mean, there is truth in that, and it does raise, whatever you think of President Donald Trump and his policies, it raises fundamental questions about democracy.
Absolutely. Simon Marks, thank you very much indeed. Interesting, isn't it? The attempted coup d'etat that is going on within the White House against President Trump carrying out his agenda. And I would say that's what Blair and others want to do. They effectively are trying to mount a coup d'etat against the referendum result. That's how I feel about it. But on Twitter I get, Blair is 100% right. The problem with Brexit is Brexit. There is no solution to the problem. We'll end up swapping one set of rules for another, dictated by someone someone else. Yeah, us. Brexit is a total waste of time and money. Well, I know some people feel like this. Now, Hannah says Brexit is a rigged con to bring our currency in line with the euro, which is what we'll get if we rejoin, and we probably will rejoin. I don't think we will, Hannah. I honestly, truthfully, don't think we will. I wouldn't trust Blair to dig my mother's next-door neighbour's garden, says Ian in Eastbourne. And Heather says, from Leicester, Nigel, why are Brexiteers so against a people's vote? Do they think they will lose? Heather, we had the people's vote, and this is not a people's vote. This is actually a vote that is being pushed by people like Tony Blair. When I was in the north of England campaigning on Saturday, I barely met anybody on the street. You know, ordinary people calling for another referendum. This is a London-based, wealthy set of young graduates and career politicians. That's what I think. Let's go to Dean, who's a new caller to the show from Bournemouth. Hi, Dean.
Hi, Nigel. Great to speak to you.
Good to speak to you. So is Blair right to say we've got to have this chance to stay in?
Definitely not. This, as far as I'm ex-forces, and as far as I'm concerned, and everyone I know, we all voted to leave because we love our country and we want to be in charge of our own destiny. So as far as we're concerned, if you get someone like Tony Blair, who we feel has got blood on his hands for the actions that he's carried out in Parliament, I don't need to go into too much detail.
No, let's not go back to that. Yeah.
No. But there's a very strong feeling amongst the forces community that this man, he has lied to Parliament over again. So how can we trust him now? Okay. We also feel that there was only two options on the voting paper 2 years ago, and one was leave and one was stay.
It wasn't that. They all say how complex it was. It's pretty straightforward, Dean, really, wasn't it?
Yeah, I totally agree. And how, why is this man being given a soapbox to stand on again? He's had his shout.
Because
he was told to go.
Dean, he is a former Prime Minister. He is entitled to say something, but I suspect the more he says, the lower his reputation goes. That's my view. Dean, I thank you. Going to King's Lynn to speak to Nick. Good evening, Nick.
Hello. Well, as an ex-forces bloke myself, I'll say to that other squaddy, the Tories supported him all the way. The Tories backed Tony Blair all the way, and he was the best Tory Prime Minister the Tories never had.
Yes, Anthony Blair. It was the anagram, Nick, wasn't it? For Anthony Blair was I'm Tory Plan B. But, I might agree with that. But is he right to speak out now, Nick? I mean, he's clearly trying to influence the Labour Party conference, and he says it's our only hope of salvation is to have a vote to stay in the EU.
Well, it's not a question of whether he's right or wrong. He's just because he was an ex-Tory best Prime Minister that wasn't, he's still a person, he's still a civilian. He's got every right to talk just as much as you have every night on that radio.
Nick, I have not said he doesn't have a right to talk, have I? I've not said that at all. In fact, I've said as a former PM, of course he has a voice. But is he right to say we need to have a second referendum with an option of staying in?
Well, I personally think he is in this case, although I'm not a Blairite. I think he is. I think it's right to have a proper referendum.
What was wrong with the last one, Nick? The result?
The Leave manifesto.
Was it the result you didn't like?
Well, I wasn't really bothered, actually, but that's not the point. No, the point, what I didn't like about it was the fact a simple leave or remain choice, binary choice, was not a choice. Where was the Leave manifesto? Where was the implementation plan?
No.
Where was the issues about Euratom, the Northern Ireland border?
No, we voted to leave. Goodbye, political union. Hello, self-government. That's what we voted for.
It's all very well voting to leave and then sitting on your backside expecting that it can go just like that.
And where was the Remain manifesto? Where were the promises of the European army? Where were the hopes of us joining the euro? Nick, we're never going to agree. Thank you. You're listening to the Nigel Farage Show here on LBC. It's 6:45 and time for the news headlines with Lisa Raziz. Well, Tony Blair tells us Brexit can't happen, but our salvation is at hand because we can have a referendum with an option to remain in. Is he right to do that? Is he right to call for that? Before I get back to that, some might remember last year I auctioned off a lunch for LBC's Make Some Noise charity, run by Global, the group that owns LBC. It's a small charity supporting little projects all over the country, and it helps families living with illness, disability or a lack of opportunity. I did it last year. I auctioned it. We raised an eye-watering amount of money. We had a really good lunch. So if you bid for this and get it, you and a couple of friends can come along and have lunch with me. It'll be on a Friday, so I won't be broadcasting that evening, if you get my drift. So the auction is now open. Very straightforward. The lunch will take place in Franco's in London. It's a great place. The bidding is open now. You go to lbc.co.uk if you want to bid for three of you to come and have a Friday afternoon having lunch with me. And by supporting Globals Make Some Noise, you'll make a really big difference to a lot of people who really genuinely need it. You've got to be over 18 to take part, and all the terms and conditions are there at lbc.co.uk. Back to Mr. Blair. Bonnie says on Facebook, I'm so glad I left the Labour Party. I'm going to the Netherlands now to speak to a new caller, Lee. Good evening, Lee.
Hello, Nigel.
Welcome to the show. So was Mr. Blair right to say that our salvation lies in having a referendum with an option to stay in?
No, it's completely wrong, because the only one you can do is stay in or leave, because it can't even be stay in or the deal, because no one's agreed on a deal yet anyway. The EU and the House of Commons are never going to agree on it, so we have to leave and then start again. Go from... and then try and make our own deal after we've left.
So do you think, Lee, there would be an argument for another referendum after we've left some years down the road?
Oh, I agree. 10 years, 10, 20 years later, so a generation later, if you're that contempt on it, do it again. A bit like how you and UKIP got 5 million votes and that sort of pushed them to do it. If another party, Lib Dems or whatever, said, come on, let's do it, I agree. But you can't say the people have changed their mind. Well, you can't change your mind if we haven't implemented it in the first place.
OK, I get the point, Lee. You're absolutely right. We haven't even had Brexit yet, says Lee from the Netherlands. Thank you very much indeed for your call. Christine says, who is Tony Blair? He's a rich man. That's who he is. Well, that doesn't necessarily make him wrong, but I do think he is. Drew is a brand new caller from Brighton in East Sussex. Good evening, Drew.
Good evening, Mr. Farage. How are you doing?
Welcome. I'm doing well, but Blair drives me round the twist. Firstly, with his sort of preaching approach to all of this, and secondly, telling us, there's no way out. Brexit can't be done. I mean, it's a ridiculous argument, surely.
Well, I agree with a lot of what you've been saying, but I do think Mr. Blair is thinking about himself and his legacy more than anything. His legacy, that when he was in power, he was very much interested in talking to his European colleagues and just trying to do what he could, although he didn't succeed a lot of the time, as we saw time and time again. I think in this country, what was happening at the time was the new generation, which technically I'm part of, New Generation 4, speaking with our chums across the borders. But I can see what he's saying, but I don't think he's going about it the right way. I think he wants to protect his legacy.
I mean, Drew, he was massively pro the European Union, and of course, remember, he spearheaded the campaign to get us to join the euro, and thank goodness we didn't do it. But no, I get your point, Drew. He sees the growth of the European project during his years as Prime Minister, part of his legacy. No, I thank you. I get the point you're making. Fran is another new caller to the show. She lives in Croydon. Good evening.
Hi, how are you, Nigel?
I'm well. I'm a bit bored with Mr. Blair, I got to tell you, but maybe you're going to tell me I'm wrong. Maybe he is the Messiah. Maybe he's our saviour, Fran.
I'm not going to kind of disagree with either of you, but I've always kind of been curious, and I said to the guy that put me through, I've been dying. I've been driving, thinking I've got to speak to Nigel Farage, and I can never remember the number to ring while I'm driving.
0345 6060973.
Yeah, I know. I need to memorise. But my thing, Nigel, is it was an extremely simple vote. It was a yes or no vote, and the vote's been made. And apart from however I might have voted or other people might have voted, but you said the very thing that I hear time and time again. We'll be in charge of our own destiny. Whatever comes of it, we will be able to make these decisions ourselves. But the whole situation that we find ourselves in at the moment is who is the champion of the best thing and who decides what's best for who. I think people voted saying, right,
Well, Mrs.
industry,
May,
whether it be
really.
fisheries, or but how many people? Like half the country voted, or more than half the country voted one way, and effectively half the country voted the other way. They weren't all Conservative voters, and May wasn't at the head of the ship at that stage.
No, I mean, in many ways, Fran...
blame the current leadership, but I'd be dying to know, Nigel. I don't know whether you can give an opinion, obviously being on the radio, but if you were PM for a day, if you had even the start of, I tell you what, a better way about going around these negotiations, what would that be?
Do you know what, Fran? And we haven't got long, but I'm going to say this one thing to you. If I'd been in charge of this from the start, I would have dealt with it, not apologetically, as our Prime Minister has done, but positively. I would have said, we're going to leave the European Union. It is a great, liberating thing for us to do. I would have gone early on, and I would still go now, for a simple free trade agreement with our European partners, but no involvement in political union, and made it clear that we are leaving. What Mrs. May has done is confuse everything. Fran, do call again, 03456060973, so that you remember the number. I'm going to go to Chris, who's calling from Southampton. Hi, Chris.
Oh, hello, Nigel. I just wanted to sort of say, as an ordinary sort of guy in the street, I really wanted to stop in Europe, but after, nearly 40 years, it was unaccountable, undemocratic. I mean, if you just base it on facts, the vanity project of moving the European Parliament every 6 months from Brussels to Strasbourg...
Every month? Every
6 months. £150 million, I believe. You've got, the way it responded to the Balkans crisis, which the UN had to step in for that, which was shame and disgraceful. The Syrian refugee crisis, Turkey's taking the brunt of that, 3 million. I just think we need to get out. But from a personal point of view, at the moment, my South African wife, 12 hours on a mini cruise going to France, the Schengen visa, the paperwork she's got to do is unbelievable. It's absolutely a ridiculous situation. I mean, we've got a mountain of paperwork just for 12 hours of being in France.
Yeah, that's not much fun, and I understand that. And, whatever we do in the future with our borders, which we'll control better, so much can be done now with modern technology. Chris, I thank you. I've got time for one last very quick caller. Tom, who's a new caller from Broadstairs in Kent. Hi, Tom.
Good evening, Nigel.
So is Mr. Blair right to say our salvation lies in a referendum to stay in the EU?
Perhaps, but I wouldn't have a second referendum until 2029.
2029, yep.
Let everybody have a good look at Brexit.
Yep.
Decide for themselves whether the economy's got worse or better.
Yep.
And then make a more informed decision.
Tom, I'm going to have to cut you short there because we're running out of time, but I thank you for your call and your clarity of argument. And Tom's point, made by lots of you tonight, we voted for Brexit. It's a matter of trust and faith in our democratic system that it's delivered. If we want to have a look again in the future, we can, but let's at least have it done first. Mr. Blair, you didn't get many supporters here tonight. You've been listening to The Nigel Farage Show. I'm back to